The town of Granford was small, but the company at the center of town was not. Granford Financial had grown big over the years. After a recent merger with another large firm, the building buzzed with nervous energy. People didn't know who was staying, who was leaving, or who was now in charge. Whispers filled the hallways. Some desks had been cleared out overnight, others had new nameplates. It was Monday, the kind of Monday where everyone arrived early. The boardroom was already half full by 8:45 a.m. The long table stretched across the room, polished so clean it reflected the ceiling lights. Around it sat men in suits and women in skirts and blazers. There were coffee cups, clicking pens, and folders filled with charts and graphs. People were talking, but not loudly. No one wanted to be the first to say something wrong. The door opened and a woman walked in. She wasn't loud. She didn't smile too much or try to stand out. She walked in like she belonged there, but not like she needed to prove it. Her name was Angela Morris. She looked about 30, maybe a bit older. She wore a navy blue suit, simple, clean, nothing flashy. In her hand was a brown leather notebook, worn at the edges, like it had been used many times. Her hair was neatly tied back and her eyes were calm but focused. Some people in the room looked up when she entered. A few nodded politely. Others just stared. No one said anything. She was new. Most of them had never seen her before. Angela chose a seat near the middle of the table. Not at the head, not at the far end. She didn't say a word. She just sat down, opened her notebook, and started flipping through some pages. At the far end of the table sat Richard Collins. Richard had been with the company for 15 years. He had slicked back hair, a grey suit, and a habit of talking too much in meetings. He always acted like he knew everything. He didn't like change, and he didn't like not knowing someone in the room. He leaned toward the man next to him, pretending to look at a paper. Then he whispered with a smirk, "Must be someone's assistant, probably here to take notes." The other man gave a small chuckle. A woman nearby glanced over but said nothing. She looked back down at her folder. Angela didn't seem to hear, or maybe she did, and just chose not to respond. Her expression didn't change. The head of the meeting, Mr. Bradley, walked in right after. He was one of the senior directors and known for being sharp but fair. He took his place at the head of the table, set down his laptop and looked around. "Morning, everyone," he said. "Let's begin." The room quieted at once. People sat up straighter. Some flipped open their laptops. Others got out pens. Angela didn't move much. She just picked up a pen and rested it on her notebook. As the meeting began, Mr. Bradley started going over the changes from the merger. New departments, new systems, and new leadership roles. Some people listened closely. Others pretended to understand. Richard leaned back in his chair, relaxed. He had been through changes before and always landed on his feet. He figured this would be no different. Angela remained quiet, taking small notes as Mr. Bradley spoke. Her handwriting was neat and slow, as if she wanted to think about every word. No one introduced her. No one asked who she was. But she didn't seem worried about that. When the first half of the meeting ended, a few people stood up to stretch. Some walked over to the side table to refill their coffee. Richard stayed seated, but turned to the woman next to him and said, just a little louder than needed, "It's nice when they let the admin staff sit in. Gives them a good look at how things really work." A few people chuckled again, not many. One man looked uncomfortable and sipped his coffee without saying anything. Angela looked up for a moment. Her eyes met Richard's. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at him for a few seconds, then went back to her notebook. There was something about her silence that made Richard pause for a moment, but he shook it off quickly. To him, she was no one. A quiet woman who probably didn't understand the big picture. The room filled back up. Mr. Bradley cleared his throat and said, "All right, let's move on to project presentations. Richard, you're up first." Richard stood, smoothed his suit and walked to the front of the room. Angela turned a page in her notebook and kept her pen ready. She didn't know it yet, but this meeting would change everything, not just for Richard, but for the entire company. And for Angela, it would be the quiet start of something big. The end. The meeting carried on, and the air in the room seemed to thicken with every passing minute. Richard, always eager for attention, had taken his place at the front. He moved around the room confidently, speaking about a new project the company was planning to roll out. He used big words, bold gestures, and kept his voice loud enough to fill the space. Richard enjoyed the spotlight, and everyone knew it. His presentation was filled with buzzwords and technical jargon, but he didn't really explain much about how this project would affect the people it was designed to help, those on the smaller side, the ones with fewer resources, who would be the most impacted by the changes. Angela, still sitting quietly near the middle of the room, watched him closely. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush to make a point. She simply took notes. Her hand moved across the page slowly, neatly. She wasn't here to make a fuss or fight for attention. She was here to listen, to understand. When Richard finally stopped talking, a few of the people in the room clapped. It wasn't a strong applause. It was polite, the kind you give when you don't want to seem rude. Richard smiled, clearly pleased. He looked around the room, waiting for someone to ask questions, ready for more praise. Angela raised her hand, gently. It was a small movement, not demanding. She didn't stand up or try to get attention. She waited until she was sure everyone could see her. "I have a question," Angela said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm concerned about the long-term effects of this project on our smaller clients, the ones who are struggling the most. How will they be impacted by these changes?" There was a brief pause. Richard, who had been so full of energy, suddenly stopped and looked at her. For a moment, his face tightened. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially by someone who hadn't even introduced herself yet. Angela waited. She didn't look at him angrily. She didn't make any effort to show she was upset. She simply waited for his response. Richard let out a small laugh, more out of discomfort than anything else. "Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Maybe let the senior staff handle the big stuff, love." There was a light chuckle from the people around him. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Angela feel like she had been brushed aside. Some of the faces in the room looked down, at their papers, not meeting her eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Angela didn't move. She didn't react. She just looked back at Richard, her face calm and neutral. Richard, sensing that no one was going to question him, continued speaking. "Maybe once you've sat through a few more meetings, you'll get it," he said, with a casual smirk. He was trying to laugh off the awkwardness, to make it seem like he hadn't just dismissed someone with a real concern. But the words hung in the air heavier than he realized. Still, no one said anything. No one came to Angela's defense. Some of them were too nervous to speak up. Others didn't want to rock the boat. So the room fell back into silence, and Richard continued, shifting gears into the next part of his presentation. Angela stayed still. She didn't protest. She didn't argue. Her hand gently closed her notebook, and she sat back in her chair, listening as Richard droned on. She didn't feel the need to respond right away. She knew what had just happened. She knew how the room had reacted, or hadn't reacted. It didn't bother her, at least not in the way it would have bothered someone else. In her silence, Angela's thoughts began to work. She understood that the company had been so focused on growth, on numbers, on expansion, that they had overlooked the very people who would be most affected by their plans. She wasn't angry at Richard, though. She understood the world he lived in, where power and authority often meant that others were dismissed without a second thought. What bothered her more was the way the room had reacted. No one had stepped in to stop him. No one had said, "That's not right." No one had taken a moment to defend the woman who had spoken up with a legitimate concern. The room had just moved on, as if Angela didn't matter. She wasn't angry, but she was disappointed. She was disappointed in the silence, in the way people allowed this to happen. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. She wasn't about to make a scene. She wasn't going to fight every battle. But she was starting to realize that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It wouldn't be the last either. In moments like these, it wasn't about being loud. It wasn't about shouting over someone. It was about standing firm in who you were, what you believed in, and where you wanted to go. As Richard wrapped up the meeting and everyone started to pack up, Angela stood up slowly, gathered her things, and walked out of the room quietly. She didn't look back. She didn't say a word to anyone. The room was still buzzing with chatter, but no one seemed to notice her leave. What they didn't know was that Angela wasn't the kind of woman who would just sit quietly and wait for things to change. She didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't need anyone to defend her. She would make her voice heard, even if it meant waiting for the right moment. And the right moment was coming. The end. The room had been buzzing with conversations. People quietly packing up their things after Richard's long presentation. Most of them were eager to move on to the next task. But then, the chairman, Mr. Bradley, turned to Angela. "Angela," he said, his voice steady and calm, "would you like to share your review of this proposal?" Richard's eyes widened. He blinked twice, clearly confused. "Wait, what?" There was a moment of awkward silence. Richard had been so caught up in the presentation, so sure of himself, that he hadn't even thought about the possibility that Angela might be involved in the discussion. He looked around, waiting for someone to confirm that this was a mistake. But no one said anything. Angela, as calm as ever, smiled politely. She didn't look flustered. She didn't show any sign of rushing. Slowly, she reached for her brown leather notebook, opened it, and pressed a small button on the table in front of her. The room fell quiet. The sound of clicking pens stopped. Angela's presentation appeared on the screen. It was clean, clear, and professional. At the top of the slide were her name, title, and credentials. Angela Morris, Executive Director, Global Strategy. Richard's mouth went dry. His face flushed, his earlier smirk now completely gone. He leaned back in his chair, unsure of what to do next. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't known who Angela really was, or what her position was within the company. He had assumed she was just someone's assistant, someone with little power. But now, as the room began to understand who she truly was, it was clear that he had made a serious mistake. Angela's first slide was simple. It showed the current state of the company, the goals of the merger, and the risks involved. There were graphs, but not too many. She didn't drown them in data. Instead, her presentation focused on the people, the clients, the employees, the customers, and how the project would impact them. She spoke in a calm, steady voice. "The proposal, as it stands, does not adequately address the long-term effects on our smaller clients," Angela began. "These are the people who will be hit hardest by any changes we make, especially in the early stages of the rollout. We need to ensure they have the support they need, or we risk losing them completely." Angela wasn't rude, and she didn't attack anyone. She spoke with care, with an understanding that the business world wasn't just about numbers and growth. It was about relationships, about the people who relied on them. The words she chose were measured, thoughtful, and deeply considerate of everyone involved. She continued to explain her concerns, breaking down each part of the project. She highlighted potential pitfalls, but she didn't leave it at that. She offered suggestions for improvement, practical ideas that could make the project more inclusive, more sustainable, and, most importantly, more beneficial to the smaller clients who might be overlooked otherwise. The room was completely silent now. No one spoke. Even Richard had stopped trying to hide his surprise. He was staring at the screen, his eyes wide. Angela's presentation was calm, but it was sharp. She had every point laid out clearly, with facts to back it up, and no one could deny that she was right. When Angela finished, she didn't ask for applause. She didn't even look for approval. She simply said, "Thank you," in the same calm voice, and sat back down. She didn't need to say more. The room was still processing what had just happened. Richard cleared his throat, his face turning a little red. He glanced around the room, hoping someone would say something, but no one spoke. The uncomfortable silence stretched on for a few moments. Finally, Mr. Bradley, who had been quietly watching Angela's presentation, looked at Richard. "Richard," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "it looks like there are some important considerations that we missed. Perhaps we should take another look at the proposal and address these concerns before moving forward." Richard nodded, slowly, but he didn't say anything. He felt embarrassed, exposed. He had dismissed Angela without knowing who she was or what she could offer. He had assumed that because she didn't fit the usual mold of someone in a leadership position, she wouldn't have anything valuable to say. But now, the entire room had seen just how wrong he was. Angela sat quietly, her posture relaxed. She didn't look smug, but there was a quiet confidence about her. She had said what needed to be said. She had made her point, and she had done it with dignity. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to force anyone to listen. Her words, her presentation had spoken for themselves. As the meeting wrapped up, a few people turned to Angela. They smiled at her with respect, some of them even nodding. Richard, though, remained silent, his mind racing. He was still trying to process everything. He had thought he was the one in control. He had thought he knew what the company needed. But Angela had shown him something different. She had shown him that leadership wasn't about who you were or what you looked like. It was about the ability to see what others couldn't, to speak up when it mattered, and to stand firm even when others overlooked you. Angela gathered her things quietly. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She didn't need to. She had already made her impact. The company had just begun to understand who she really was. And, as they would soon find out, she wasn't going anywhere. The end later that week, Richard was called into a meeting with Human Resources. He had expected a quiet conversation about his behavior, but it turned out to be much more serious than that. The HR manager, along with two senior leaders, sat across from him, their faces neutral but their eyes serious. "Richard," the HR manager began, "we've been made aware of your behavior in recent meetings, specifically your treatment of Angela Morris during the boardroom presentation." Richard's throat tightened. He had heard whispers around the office, but he hadn't expected it to come up in such a direct way. He knew he had been disrespectful, but he had tried to brush it off. After all, it was just a few comments, right? The HR manager continued, "This wasn't just about today. We've noticed a pattern of behavior over the past few months. Your interactions with other employees, especially those from underrepresented groups, have raised concerns." Richard's face went pale. He had been dismissive of a few people, sure, but he never thought it would be considered a problem. He had always been confident that his work spoke for itself, and he didn't see the harm in cracking a joke here and there. But now, hearing it from HR, he started to realize the impact of his words and actions. "We're not here to punish you, Richard," the HR manager said, trying to soften the message. "But we do need to address this behavior. It's affecting the team, and it's affecting the company's culture." Richard nodded, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what to say. He had been caught. He had been rude and thoughtless, but he wasn't sure how to fix it. After a long pause, one of the senior leaders spoke up. "We've already started the process of implementing a new training program for the team. This will focus on respect, diversity, and empathy, values that are central to our company moving forward. We believe it's important for everyone, including you, to be a part of this." Richard didn't speak for a moment. He wasn't sure if he was angry or ashamed. He had always prided himself on being a strong leader, but now he saw how he had missed something important. He realized that being a good leader didn't mean just pushing for results. It meant caring for the people around him, listening to them, and showing respect. "Understood," Richard said quietly, his voice low. "I'll participate in the training. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." The meeting ended with Richard feeling a mix of emotions: embarrassment, regret, and a little bit of confusion. He wasn't sure how to start changing, but he knew he had to try. Meanwhile, Angela had been involved in setting up the training program, but not in the way one might expect. She hadn't asked for Richard to be punished. She hadn't demanded that he be reprimanded. What she had asked for was something deeper, a shift in how the company approached respect, understanding, and empathy. She met with HR and the leadership team to discuss how to create a more inclusive environment. They didn't want to just tick boxes or have a one-time seminar. They wanted to build something that would last, something that would change the way everyone at the company saw each other. Angela wasn't angry. She didn't want revenge. She knew that change didn't come from bitterness. It came from understanding. She wasn't there to hold grudges or make people feel guilty. She was there to show them how much more they could achieve together if they treated each other with kindness and respect. When the first training session began, Angela stood at the front of the room. She was calm and collected, but there was a quiet strength in her presence. She didn't have to raise her voice to be heard. The room was silent, everyone waiting for her to speak. She started by telling them a little about herself, about her journey, and how she had come to understand the value of respect and empathy in the workplace. "We all have something to learn," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "Even me." It wasn't a speech full of grand statements or perfect solutions. It was simple. It was real. Angela talked about the importance of listening to others, about being open to new ideas, and about recognizing that everyone had something valuable to contribute. She shared stories, some of her own, some from others, about how people could make a difference by showing understanding rather than judgment. Throughout the session, she encouraged people to ask questions, to share their thoughts. She didn't lecture. She created a space where people felt safe to open up, to talk about their own experiences with respect and diversity, and it made a difference. Slowly, the walls came down. People started to speak more openly, to listen more carefully, and to think more deeply about how their actions affected others. Richard attended the session, sitting near the back of the room, his face flushed. He wasn't sure what to expect. But as Angela spoke, he began to see things differently. The simple truth of her words hit him harder than he had anticipated. He hadn't realized how much his behavior had hurt others, how many opportunities he had missed to make people feel valued. When the session ended, Angela thanked everyone for attending and for their willingness to be part of the change. Her words had left a mark on the room. People felt different, lighter maybe, and they were ready to do the work needed to build a better, more inclusive environment. Angela didn't expect everything to change overnight. She knew it would take time, but that was okay. The important thing was that the process had started. She had shown that respect wasn't just something you talked about, it was something you lived. Her quiet strength, her calm approach, had made an impact. And though the work was far from over, Angela knew that they were on the right path. The end months passed, and things began to change at the company. The office felt different, not just because of the training programs and new policies, but because of the way people treated each other. There was a shift in the atmosphere. People shared more, ideas, opinions, even concerns. They helped each other more, offering support and guidance in ways they hadn't before. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. It was a start. Angela had become a mentor to many of the junior staff, especially young women who were just starting out. She didn't just lead meetings or make decisions. She took time to sit down with them, to listen, to help them find their voice in a room that could sometimes feel overwhelming. She shared advice, but also her own experiences, the struggles, the setbacks, the times when she felt like she didn't belong, but kept going anyway. It wasn't about just teaching skills or strategies. It was about showing them that their voices mattered, that they had something valuable to offer. She wanted to make sure that the next generation of women didn't have to fight the same battles she had fought. She wanted to create a space where they could rise without having to prove themselves over and over again. One morning, a new intern named Liam walked into the boardroom for his first meeting. He was young, probably in his early 20s, and he looked nervous. He had the kind of anxiety that came with being the new person in a room full of people who had years of experience. His eyes darted around as he took his seat, trying to blend in, hoping no one would notice how unsure he felt. Angela saw him right away. She had been in his shoes once. She had been the one who felt out of place, who doubted whether she really belonged. She knew what it was like to walk into a room and feel like the walls were closing in on you. As the meeting began, Liam's hands trembled slightly, gripping the edges of his notebook. He didn't speak up when others did. He just nodded along, staying quiet, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Angela watched him for a moment, noticing the way he shrank into his chair. When the meeting took a break, Angela stood up and walked over to him. She smiled gently, a warmth in her expression. "Liam," she said softly, "you belong here." Liam looked up, surprised. He hadn't expected anyone to pay attention to him, especially not someone like Angela, who was already well established in the company. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. Instead, he just smiled back, a little unsure but grateful for her kind words. Angela's smile never wavered. She knew what it meant to be seen, to be acknowledged when you least expected it. She had fought for that recognition herself, and now she was offering it to someone else. It wasn't just about being nice. It was about making sure the next person didn't have to struggle to be heard. She wanted them to feel like they belonged from the very beginning. As the meeting continued, Liam became a little more confident. He spoke up once, then twice, offering a few thoughtful ideas. The more he spoke, the more he realized that he wasn't invisible, that his thoughts and contributions mattered. And as he looked around the room, he saw that people were listening, really listening to what he had to say. Angela didn't expect anything in return. She wasn't doing this to be praised. She was doing it because she knew how important it was to open the door for others. She didn't just want to be the one who succeeded. She wanted to make sure that others had the opportunity to succeed too. Her journey hadn't been about one big meeting or one turning point. It had been about the quiet moments, the ones where she helped someone else feel seen, the moments where she made sure no one else felt overlooked. She had fought for her place, and now she was making sure that others didn't have to fight as hard. As the weeks went by, Liam grew more comfortable in the company. He started to bring his own ideas to the table, to challenge assumptions, and to contribute in ways that surprised even himself. Angela continued to mentor him, offering guidance when needed, but also stepping back to let him grow on his own. It wasn't just Liam. Many others in the office had started to open up, to be more confident in sharing their thoughts, knowing that they would be heard. The culture of the company was changing. People were learning how to respect each other, how to support one another, how to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And then one day, as Angela sat in a meeting, she realized something. No one in the room questioned if she belonged anymore. There were no smirks, no whispers. She had earned her place not by fighting for it, but by showing up, by doing the work, and by helping others along the way. She had made the space for herself and for so many others too. Angela knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be more to do, more work to be done, more voices to be heard. But she had started something. She had set the example. And now she was watching as others walked through the door she had helped open. No one would ever again question if she belonged. And now, thanks to her, no one would have to question whether they belonged either. The end.